thanks for that for many years to come.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honour for me to be able to participate in this important discussion. And I want to just briefly say hello to my almost 3-year-old daughter, Gianna, who I believe is watching this back home. She's probably the only 3-year-old in the country who watches CPAC on a regular basis. Although when I told her yesterday that I would be giving a speech today, I think she thought we were going to the beach. So despite my excitement about being able to speak today, she may be a bit disappointed. Now, Mr. Speaker, watching this debate today, though, I wonder if my 3-year-old daughter may be disappointed for a different reason. As parents, we all want to pass the best that we can on to our children, in the context of our own individual families, but also in the context of social relations. We receive the goods of society from our parents, and we pass them on to our children, hopefully improved or at least not diminished. As Edmund Burke writes in Reflections on the Revolution in France, society is a partnership, not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born. Each contract of each particular state is but a clause in the great primeval contract of eternal society. And he says later, one of the first and most leading principles on which the Commonwealth and the laws are consecrated is that the temporary possessors and life renters in it should be mindful of what is due to their posterity and should not think it among their rights to cut off the entail or commit waste on the inheritance by destroying at their pleasure the whole original fabric of society, hazarding to leave to those who come after them a ruin instead of a habitation. Mr. Speaker, we live here in a great country. We can, and indeed we must, be grateful for the goods of civilization that we have received from our predecessors. And we have a duty to pass the goods of our civilization on to the next generation, socially, culturally, and fiscally. But for reasons unknown to us, and perhaps even unknown to them, the government is betraying this sacred obligation by running massive, totally unnecessary deficits, creating debts which our children and our grandchildren will have to pay off. We are spending massive amounts of money today, and they will have to pay off these debts with interest. The government is running deficits in spite of the fact that the economy is growing. They are running deficits not because of a financial crisis, but because the government felt that their only chance in the last election was to outflank the NDP on the far left. It was a cynical political game rooted in the narrow politics of the present, betraying the hard-learned lessons of the past when it comes to deficits and debt, and ignoring the needs of the future. Their cynical game was to say whatever they needed to say to get elected and let the future worry about itself. How did they plan to satisfy all their spending commitments and keep the deficit under $10 billion? They didn't have a plan. Again, it was the narrow, cynical politics of the present, without regard for the lessons of the past or the needs of the future. They promised 3 deficits of $10 billion each, but now we know that they may use up all $30 billion of that deficit commitment in year number 1. Even a $10 billion deficit would add over $300 to my daughter's share of the debt. Mr. Speaker, however important the needs of the present are, let us have enough regard for my daughter and her generation to pay for present needs with present dollars. Now, I think Canadians get this. They intuitively get the obligation that we have to generations past and to generations in the future. They get that it is wrong to burden future generations just so we can have more right now. So the Liberals are casting around for an excuse to run a massive, new, entirely pointless deficit. Their strategy is to claim that they were left with a deficit, in spite of clear evidence to the contrary from the Department of Finance and from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Forgetting the past, ignoring the future. Unfortunately, this has become the Liberal way. By contrast, it is important to highlight the realities of the previous Conservative government's very strong fiscal record. A record that demonstrates mindfulness of the past and the future, as well as the present. In our first years in office, our Conservative government ran significant surpluses, paid down debt, and cut taxes for middle and low-income Canadians. However, in late 2008, Canada was hit by the global financial crisis, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. At the time of the global financial crisis, the Liberal then opposition presented none of their own plans for the economy. Sometimes they attacked our government for running deficits, and other times they demanded bigger deficits. But we did the responsible thing. We did what past and future generations would want us to do. We ran timely, targeted, and temporary deficits, stimulating the economy and preserving vital Canadian industries, while also seeking efficiencies and bringing the budget back to balance 1 year ahead of schedule. We did it while increasing transfers to the provinces for vital public services, and we did it while further cutting taxes. And according to every credible authority, we ended our mandate in surplus. We had the best job creation record, the best GDP growth record, and we have by far the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio anywhere in the G7. We led Canada through challenging economic circumstances. We preserved strong economic fundamentals. Still today, when the Liberals look back on the global financial crisis, they insist on having their cake and eating it too. Some of the time, they tell us that Canada fared poorly during the financial crisis, despite obvious facts to the contrary. And some of the time, they tell us that Canada did well in the financial crisis, but it was only because of Liberal governments of the 90s. Other times, they criticize the deficits we used to stimulate the economy. And the rest of the time, they criticize the spending controls we impose on the federal bureaucracy, as if it were possible to balance the budget without controlling spending in certain areas. Mr. Speaker, here is our position with respect to fiscal policy. A government should run timely, targeted, and temporary deficits only in the face of significant declining revenues or in response to major crises like war or natural disasters. There is no need to cut during these periods, provided that the same government can make up the difference during good years. To do this in a timely, targeted, and temporary way is not a betrayal of future generations. Rather, it is prudent and responsible, because it is a way for the present generation to both create debt when necessary and also to do the work to pay it off. But to capriciously run structural deficits far beyond the scope which Canadians were led to believe would occur during the election, to do so in response to no significant decline in revenue or major financial event. To do this is a betrayal of our obligations to our children. It is, in effect, a demand that our children and grandchildren pay in the future for what we do not want to do without today. And Mr. Speaker, our children do not have a choice in this matter. Profligate deficit spending today robs future generations of citizens and policymakers of the ability to enact their own ambitious plans. It saddles them with debt that will limit their dreams long after ours have faded. Mr. Speaker, this is the reality in many countries around the world, countries where the financial crisis was followed by a debt crisis because they had used up all the room they had to bail themselves out. We don't have to go down this road in Canada, and that certainly isn't where we started from. It certainly isn't inevitable. If we are to now run up large new deficits, it will only be because of an irresponsible political choice, one that this government could have decided not to make, and one which this government must take responsibility for. If members of this government wish to be generous to their friends, let them do so with their own money. But the government has no money of its own. It only has the ability to spend the money earned by Canadian taxpayers. And as such, it should adopt the requisite humility that normally comes with being entrusted to discharge someone else's property. Mr. Speaker, it is not too late. I say to this government, do not capriciously run massive, totally unnecessary deficits. Do not saddle my daughter with your debt. She doesn't deserve it. And don't distort the facts to obscure responsibility. Take responsibility. Look squarely on the numbers given to you by the Finance Department and the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Take responsibility and do right by present and future taxpayers. Thank you.